Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Chiang Mai, Thailand, to speak with Michelle Bowens of the P2P Foundation. Michelle also writes for Al Jazeera. Michelle, welcome to the Keiser Report.
So it's really nice to be here. It's actually my favorite show, so this is like a really honor for me.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, Michelle, you are paying salaries in Bitcoin at the P2P Foundation. We've been talking about Bitcoin. Tell us more.
Well, there's a few things that we like about Bitcoin. The first thing is, we call it a socially sovereign currency. So it's a currency which is not created by the banks, and it's not created by the state. It really exists because there's a human community, the hacker community, the Bitcoin community, which wants this to work and trusts the protocol that is designed to create the money. So this is a kind of historical moment, for a post-Westphalian currency. We used to have local currencies, then the nation state came and basically destroyed them. And so the fact that we now have a working global currency that is created by communities in our mind is hugely significant as a kind of symbolic moment in the history of mankind. Then there is another aspect, which is it's a debt-free money. And, as you know, compound interest is a mathematical and physical, abomination that really destroys the planet. And so to have a currency with a fixed amount that is created debt-free is also really, really important. And I do think it functions as a global reserve currency already. And then finally, more pragmatically, we consider ourselves a file or a file, which is a community-supported business enterprise. And when you work like us with people in Colombia, in Barcelona, in Amsterdam, in Chiang Mai, and different places in the world, the ability to change money in different currencies through Bitcoin has quite a dramatic effect on transaction costs. It's really amazing. So this is kind of like a bit of a pragmatic extra.
Now, Michelle, many react with great hostility to Bitcoin or the mere idea of it. And these are people who normally might be supportive of gold or silver, for example, of which Bitcoin shares many of the same characteristics. Why do you think people are hostile toward Bitcoin?
Well, there is a big debate, I guess, amongst monetary people about, that money should stand for something, right? So people hate fiat money and they hate any kind of money which is not linked to something real. But actually, in actual fact, money has been virtual since at least the 70s. And Bitcoin is kind of like putting this in front of your face. Like, the only reason this money exists is because a group of people decide to trust it. Now, I know some people then claim that, it's linked to the price of electricity because of the way it's produced. I don't know. I'm not an expert enough to judge that particular aspect. But I think the key for me is how it's created through a protocol which is trusted by a community. This is the key. I think everything else is more detail. And the fact that it exists, that it's already working within that community that's now expanding outside of it, that it has a practical use, this is significant because before that we had many, many local currencies and they work, but they don't scale. I mean, you have time banks and they've been existing for 30 years. They're booming. They're being created everywhere, through movements like the Transition Town movement and other movements, but they don't scale. And Bitcoin scales. That's what's amazing about it.
Right. Well, the idea of it being tied to electricity would be a little bit like saying that the price of a euro or a dollar is tied to the price of paper. It's not really a
Yes.
practical argument per se, but with Bitcoin, it is tied to cryptography. The fact that you do have a purely anonymous currency that's outside of state, corporate, banking, fractional reserve, all the pieces of the puzzle around the global banking system that people are rebelling against due to the onerous quality of it. So it is backed by this cryptography, of which there is a limited, it is a scarcity. It is a true scarcity. There's a true scarcity of Bitcoins, and this drives, at the end of the day, value, whereas all the central banks and the commercial banks, anytime they have a bill due, they just print more of their fiat currency. So there is something backing the Bitcoin. Now, you describe our economic system as being one of pseudo-abundance and artificial scarcity. Explain.
Imagine you're a Martian and you come to this planet and you see this race of humans actually destroying the biosphere. And the reason they do this is because they believe the system is based on the idea that we have infinite material resources. And this is just not true. So because of compound interest and other features, we have to grow all the time. And that creates this compound exponential growth. And the planet can no longer carry it. So this is the real crisis of our system. And the second crisis is that, so we need to solve all these problems, but we can't because, there's a law that says if you share information, you go to jail. And it's really essential that we have a system that turns those two things around. So, limiting our economic growth to what the earth can regenerate. And then the other part is make solutions globally available. I used to work in the oil industry in the, the early 90s. And, in the 70s, with a thriving renewable energy industry in California. And what happened? They bought the companies up, took the patents, shelved them, and we lost 30 years of development that we would have needed to avoid global warming. And so this is what I mean by artificial scarcity. And the peer-to-peer paradigm that I'm working on with many other people is basically about this: is create a system where sharing is free and the economy takes account of externalities. It's responsible for what it does to the planet. So this is kind of an alternative model where this sickness, this basic cancerous DNA is kind of like transformed into its opposite. So recognition of limitations and recognition that sharing, immaterial resources can be shared at no cost. So why should you make that criminal?
All right, so let's talk about the two planks of your argument here. The pseudo-abundance, this applies to things like natural resources or energy resources. Oil, for example, people are very reluctant to take on board the fact that starting at about a year ago, the globe hit peak oil in terms of the cheap oil readily available, and they simply have an orthodoxy that rejects the idea that the Earth could possibly run out of natural resources, even though the evidence is banging them in the head like a frying pan every single day. And then you have the artificial scarcity. And this, of course, is what Milton Friedman mentioned when he talked about copyright and copyright law. He said it was an artificial scarcity, and you couldn't really apply private property laws to copyright. And what about this topic of copyright and the copyright cartels? We see that the United States government is acting on behalf of those who monopolize the artificially scarce copyright intellectual property domain, and they're becoming more and more extreme. So, in other words, Hollywood has lobbyists in Washington that they don't want people copying their material, even though they have a constitutional right to do so. And they're willing to throw the entire American economy under the bus. They're willing to throw the entire internet under the bus to protect a very small slice of the global economy. And because they have Hollywood behind them, they get away with this incredible, narrowly interested capsizing of the better interests of the society for the benefit of a few pampered and privileged copyright cartelists in Hollywood.
Basically, we are no longer making that much money with industrial production, right? I mean, the real profit is not in industrial production, it's in intellectual property. So from the point of view of the United States and its big companies, it makes sense, because they are making shoes for $5 in China, and the Chinese, well, yes, their economy is growing, but, they get really small profit rates on that production. And then they sell them for $150 in the West. And that surplus is intellectual property. That's the only reason they can sell those shoes at those prices. And so if you want to do that, you need a repressive IP regime. You need repression. I think I want to make another point, which is basically, capitalism is based on economies of scale. Its assumption that material resources are infinite means that the way to compete is to produce more of a good. So you bring down the price to produce it, you outcompete others, and prices go down. But you understand the logic is making more is competitive. Now, as we go from a society which is marked by abundance of energy and resources to one that is where it's diminishing, that's not going to work anymore. So we need to move from economies of scope to economies of scale, from scale to scope. So the common cost of producing something needs to go down. And this is what peer production does, where it moves from software, free software, to shared designs, and then actually to physical production. I don't know if you're familiar with Wikispeed. Wikispeed is a car that was produced in 3 months by volunteers competing for a X Prize. It's a 100 mile per gallon car, top-notch security certificates, and it can be made in a micro factory in your garage. So it scales up from one. So this is the kind of economy we need in the future, right? So the immaterial part is shared. The designs can be downloaded in the whole world, and then you have companies making them on demand, printing on demand, making on demand. And this is what peer-to-peer stands for, is this switch where the culture, the science, all that is shared, and the making is done in distributed factories. And then that's where Bitcoin comes in, right? You have distributed machinery, 3D printing, personal fabricators, multi-machines, CNC milling machines. In these micro factories, you have these shared design depositories like Thingiverse. And then you can get money in a distributed fashion through social lending and crowdfunding. And then you can pay with a distributed currency, which is produced in a peer-to-peer way. If you have a computer, you can produce Bitcoins. The point I'm trying to make is that these pieces of the puzzles, which are separate, are starting to come together. We're seeing distributed patterns emerging in every field of human endeavor. And Bitcoin is part of that. Distributed money, distributed funding, distributed manufacturing, distributed knowledge creation. All these things are the new DNA of a new civilization, a new economics, a new society.
Okay, so it's a P2P renaissance. Michel Bauwens, we're out of time. I wish I could spend another 20 or 30 minutes with you, but we'll have to have you back on if that's okay with you. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
I'm tremendously honored, and yes, I do hope that we can talk again.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Michel Bauwens of the P2P Foundation. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.